Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. How you doing? The United States of Europe. It's got a ring to it. That's interesting. I heard that term for the first time, I think yesterday or a couple days ago. I don't know. Either way, it stuck with me, and I'm like, that's interesting. You know, as distinguishing it from just the EU, the European Union, the United States of Europe. I'd never heard anyone say that before. But I searched it up, and I've found that, this is like a concept, I guess, that has been thought about. I don't know much about it, to be honest, at all. Clearly. I don't even know why I'm trying to talk about it like I do. I don't. That's the whole point. But the EU made simple. These guys, legends, check them out, link down below, have this video, a United States of Europe by 2030. How would it work? That's what I want to know.
An EU-wide common tax code, an EU-wide common immigration policy, or even an EU-wide common army. In other words, a United
Oh man, imagine an EU army.
States of Europe. Is this the future the EU is heading towards?
Wow.
And if it is, what political model would work better?
That would be really interesting, wouldn't it? It does sound difficult. I'm a listen, but it does sound logistically difficult, with all the different languages, cultures, and stuff.
Best, a unitary model like the UK, or a federal model like the US and Switzerland? To answer this video will dive into the following 3 topics. Firstly, what are the potential government models that the EU could develop into? Secondly, what does a federal EU even mean? And lastly, what will actually happen? So to start off with,
And this is 2 years ago. I mean, I don't know. I think there's renewed talk about it now, maybe?
are the political systems the EU could develop into? Before we can answer this, we need to look at power distribution. How is political power distributed between the national level and the subnational level? In other words, a country's national parliament versus its regional parliaments across the country. On the one end, there's the unitary model of government. Here, the national government has total authority over all the country's subnational regions. France is a great example, as its central government has control of nearly 1,000 political subdivisions, who mainly exist to implement directives issued by the central government. Globally, there are 165 unitary states, making it the most common form of government in the world. Next, there's the federal model of government. Here, political authority is divided between 2 sets of governments, one national and the other subnational, both of which answer to the people. This means that local provinces and states have their own governments with some authority over their territory. Of the 8 largest countries in the world by area, 7 are organized on a federal basis. Then there is a
Oh, China's not. I really don't know much about China's whole system, how it's set up.
federal model of government. In this model, all the power resides with the independent states, or in other words, the subnational governments. The central government can only act if all subnational governments find common ground unanimously. Currently, there are no pure confederal countries in the world. So what about the EU? Well, a lot of power clearly still resides with the member states, as the EU has exclusive rights to legislate in only 5 areas: the customs union, competitional rules for the single market, monetary policy for Eurozone countries, trade, and marine plant and animals. Then there's also some shared power, as there are 15 areas where both the EU and the national governments can legislate. Then there are 4 policy areas where EU member states have veto rights, meaning that very little gets done in these areas.
Fiscal policy, social security, police cooperation, and foreign policy. Wow.
And then
It's a complicated system. It is difficult to grasp the entire thing.
there's a long list of policy areas that are predominantly managed on a country level. We can therefore conclude that the vast majority of power lies with the member states, therefore placing the EU more towards a confederal model rather than a federal model. This brings us to the next part of the video. What does a more federal EU mean? To become a functioning federation, as we know them today, there are 4 baseline criteria that the EU needs to work towards. Firstly, it needs to consider to centralize key policies. In a typical federation, such as the US, the following policy areas are managed on a central level. Firstly, internal security, for example, the FBI. Secondly, foreign policy. Then a common military for defense. Then monetary policy to control the money supply and interest rates. And lastly, a common fiscal policy to finance the provision of these public goods. Currently, only monetary policy is managed centrally in the Eurozone countries. Moreover,
Because it has to be if you're all going to use the same currency.
in present-day EU, most of the public goods provided by the Union are financed not through federal taxes, but by national contributions. In the US federal model, there is both a federal tax and a state tax. The federal tax is used on a central level for government spending, for example, defense policy, and the state tax is used on a more local level, for example, on education spending. Like the U.
As Californians, we are with 13.3% state tax. Yeah, it is crazy how diversified those are. You know, there's quite a lot of diversity among the states to an extent. You know, especially among like taxes, local taxes. Like some states will have no sales tax, no income tax, no property tax, but you know they all have their different combination.
US, the EU could centralize these policy areas, meaning that the member states would lose some sovereignty, but the EU would be able to make quicker and more decisive decisions on the world stage. Should the EU go even further, though? For example, what about immigration and border control? Or the environment? Or even healthcare? Let me know in the comments.
It's such an interesting thing, right? I mean, on so many issues, it would make it much, much, much more easy to coordinate, you know, centrally what to do.
What
But I really value, I think a lot of people probably value the selection you have among EU states, you know, as far as where you want to live and the differences among them. And, you know, some of that would be mitigated or compromised. Inevitably, you know what I mean?
policies you think make sense on a federal level?
I mean, if it was the US of Europe, would that be a country? The United States of Europe? That's crazy to imagine.
And which don't? And please like the video and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. Next, there's the issue that member states have veto rights. As mentioned before, there are 4 key policy areas in which the European Union cannot legislate unless there's unanimous agreement. These areas are fiscal policy, including taxes, social security, police cooperation, and foreign policy.
I wonder if it's ever been used.
This means that the entire EU can be held hostage if one country disagrees. For example, Germany blocked a recent proposal to ban Russian gas, and Hungary blocked a proposal to
Wow, okay, but that was 2 years ago.
ban Russian oil via pipelines. Instead of veto rights, the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union should vote on such proposals.
I mean, it just, you know, it's these types of issues happen all the time where it's like, yeah, you guys, you know, maybe that's a great idea and maybe you're right. That's the way it should be, but like you're not the ones dependent on this thing or what have you. So, yeah, we're not doing that.
Next, there's the need for a
Like, it's easy for you guys to say that. You're not dependent on it.
pan-European constituency. In a typical federation,
And I'm saying that like as a general thing, like that type of disagreement and stalemate can happen, you know, I feel like a lot.
you get multiple votes, one on a local level and another on a national level. Currently in the EU, citizens get 1 vote each, which goes to a national party who then form an alliance with other member state national parties to form the European Parliament. In a pan-European constituency, citizens would get a 2nd vote for parties that campaign throughout the EU. These candidates would then represent the EU rather than just their own member state. The first steps towards this model have already been
That would be so crazy.
made, as the
I mean, like as of now, like in my brain, it's like who's the next world you know, what's the word I'm thinking of? You know, it's like superpower. Like, is it going to be the United States or will China rise up and overtake it? Which is looking possible. But if this happened, like instantly the United States of Europe would be a huge contender and maybe just immediately become. I mean, it would depend how quickly you guys built a military. That would be a hell of a force to be reckoned with, I'll say that. But like I said, from kind of like a freedom perspective, like getting to choose between different states and stuff, and having not so much centralized power, yeah, there's the good and the bad with it, huh?
European Parliament recently adopted a proposal to have 28 additional MEPs elected across Europe. A big shout out to Vibes from our community, who made me aware of this topic, although I'm sure he will argue that 28 MPs aren't enough. Lastly, the European Commission President is currently elected by the European Council behind closed doors.
Oh. I don't even know who the European Commission President is, to be honest. Just being honest, guys. I'm always honest, okay? Don't make fun of me. Please. She must be from Sweden. Ursula von der Leyen. Wow. Oh, she's German? That's cool. I kind of want to learn about like her and like how significant. This sounds like a pretty important position there.
To make the process more transparent and democratic, the European Parliament and Council should be involved. But I've made an entire video about this linked below, so if you are interested, check it out. If these 4 areas are addressed,
Definitely go check out this dude's channel. I've watched some videos on my own accord. It's very good.
the EU could truly be called a federation. On the other hand, the EU can also roll back federalism towards a more confederal model, where the member states hold more power. Monetary policy in Eurozone countries is currently federalized with the euro, but there are still skeptics who question whether this young currency will survive. And that brings us to the
That's interesting, you know. It's interesting, like, growing older and, you know, I don't know. What year was the euro made again? But my point is, like, you have these things like the euro. When? 1999. So, like, you know, I was too young to really know what was going on. You know what I mean? I was just eating Airheads and fruit by the foot. And the euro was being made. But now, like, as an adult, I kind of just feel like it was always around. You know what I mean? To me, it's like, the euro's going to die. Like, what do you mean? It's always been there. But, you know, like, people born, you know, if you're a bit older, if you're 20 years older than me, you're like, yeah, like, the euro's not even that old. Like, when I was, you know, I remember when it was made. It gives you a different perspective.
final part of the video. How
I mean, like, I have that perspective on stuff like the internet and iPhones. You know what I mean? And kids these days cannot have that perspective. You know, and I feel like that's an important perspective to know what the world was like before the internet and before iPhones. Anyway.
How likely is it for the EU to move towards a federal model? The EU is currently closer to a confederation than it is to a federation, but history has shown that a confederation often results in the establishment of a federation. Take Switzerland and
It does feel like a slippery slope's gonna eventually, you know, happen.
the US. Both started as a confederation, but ended up becoming federal unions. And the Swiss model is very interesting, as it has 7 heads of state, a direct democracy where the Swiss people also have the right to vote directly on specific issues.
I love that, to be honest.
And the subnational states, also called cantons, have a lot of power.
I've heard people say, you know, that direct democracy doesn't work well. And it's like, to be honest, I'm like, I don't really care. I like it for like virtuous reasons. You know what I mean? I just think it's good. I think it's good. I want to go vote directly. I don't want to have to trust some dude telling me what he is and isn't going to do. That's just me, though.
This might be the best federal model for the EU to adopt, but this is a topic for another video. There's also a lot of support in Germany for a federal Europe, with Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz stating that a sovereign Europe is the key for our foreign policy. Not to mention that recent events have shown that an integrated EU is necessary to deal with global issues. And progress towards a federation has already been made.
Just imagine, like, oh man, I can only imagine the scale of the event, you know, of electing the United States of Europe's president, for example. You know what I mean? Like, you guys are electing a new president. That would be so crazy. The president of the entire U.S. of Europe. I think it would be entertaining. I kind of want you guys to do it just because I would be entertained, okay? Can you do it for that reason?
For example, the introduction of Eurobonds, which was a taboo subject only 5 years ago. And not to mention the EU procuring vaccines on behalf of all member states and creating a green pass. And then of course there's the Eurozone, which really is a federal monetary policy. But President Macron has recently mentioned...
That's how you say Macron? Macron. Macron.
...is a federal monetary policy. But President Macron has recently...
I can't believe that.
...mentioned a new idea of creating a two-tiered European Union. He implied that it may take decades for the newly applied countries, Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, to join the EU. Not to mention the 5 candidate countries who are still stuck in the process of joining. Therefore, he suggests that we have a tiered model. The more integrated tier would be the European Union we have today, with 26 member states who enjoy a political union with aligned principles and values. Then a second, less integrated tier would be created, which Macron calls a European political community. Within this new political union, nations like Ukraine and even post-Brexit Britain could forge deeper ties without officially joining the EU. This could include cooperation in security, energy, transport, infrastructure investment.
It's interesting. I feel like there would be drama about, oh, this country's getting security even though they're not contributing and they shouldn't be, this lower tier. That people would be like, like if this happened here in the States, I could imagine Texas being like, we don't even want to be part of the main one. Like, we want to go down to tier 2, okay? That's the better deal.
Investments and the movement of people. I personally also like the idea of potentially also having a third tier, a federal European Union for those who want it. Here, countries wishing for more integration in terms of foreign policy, military, fiscal policy, internal security, and immigration could do so. With these 3 tiers, European countries can determine how much integration they want and can move between these tiers depending on what the voters in their respective countries want.
That would be fun.
Find a multi-tiered Europe a fascinating topic and think that this might be the most likely way forward. I would love to dive into this deeper and let me know in the comments if you're
I kind of trust this guy. He's got a whole YouTube channel about the EU, you know what I mean? That sounds pretty cool.
interested in another video.
I'm intrigued. 2030. It's only 5 years away. It's going to be here like that, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you guys are having a great weekend. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.